Hello, everybody. Welcome to the X Podcast. It's so good to have you with us today, however you are listening. If you're watching on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever else podcasts are, we're just glad you're here with us. And it's a very, very special day today because we have some amazing guests, the Johnsons, Kristi and Terry.
Hello.
How are you guys doing?
Great. Good stuff.
So good. Oh my gosh, it's so good to have you guys with us here today. We go way back. I was thinking, what's my first memory of you guys? And I remember being at a baseball game at that little baseball field here in town off of that road off of Dietz.
Right by the church.
Is that right? Yep,
Yeah.
right by the church.
Yeah. For Carter's, the Winchester Warriors.
Yep. My little brother.
8 years old.
My little brother played with Brock, and then I think we had some sort of party at Sycamore Creek, the church that you guys attend.
Yeah.
And
End of year party.
I know, and that was, and you guys have a frisbee golf thing close to the church, right? Is that right?
Used to.
Yeah,
in the
okay.
past.
But that would have been 13 years ago.
Oh, that's crazy. We go way back.
Yeah.
Way back.
We haven't changed a bit in 13 years.
And a lot has happened in 13 years.
Yes.
Yep.
For
a lot of good,
sure.
A lot of bad.
A lot of good, a lot of bad. And as we have kind of been talking with some people a couple weeks ago, and we had Kayla Lockhart on.
Mm-hmm.
You guys know Kayla really well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And she shared her story about Aiden and just their journey. And we've been thinking about, as we go through this pandemic kind of year and the season where everything's kind of all over the place, there's a lot of different emotions we're all working through. Mm-hmm. And one of those questions that we feel like people are asking is why does God let really hard things, really bad things happen to us?
Mm-hmm. That's a really good question. You're going to answer it for us?
I wish. I wish.
I think Jesus could answer that if he came down today.
I
but,
know.
No clue on that one.
Don't you just wish he would, get his microphone and tell us all right now? But something that we've all asked at some point, whatever you've gone through.
Yep.
And whether tragedies hit you personally, whether you've seen it from afar, you wonder, how could anybody believe in a God that allows A, B, C to happen?
Yeah.
And so we're going to get into all sorts of things today. But first, I just want to I'm sure a lot of people on the other end of this podcast who are who don't know who you are, who don't know your story. And so why don't you guys just share a little bit of background about who you are and what you're doing now and what led you to this point.
Yeah. So Terry and I started dating in high school. Just a little background about us. So we pretty much grew up together and honestly had a pretty easy life most of the time. We had Tucker when we were 28. Tucker's the worst, one of the worst leaders here. And then
Tucker's right back here working, doing something. So.
And then a couple years later, we had Brock, who was awesome and really nothing abnormal. I played softball up until 2 weeks before I had Brock. Easy pregnancy, nothing to make us think that anything was going to be wrong. But at 5 days old, he started breathing really fast and just a plethora of other things. We went in the hospital at 5 days old and was tested for all these things. We were told of all these things he possibly had. He probably wasn't going to live. Bring your family in. He's only going to live a week. And then they'd be like, okay, it wasn't that. It wasn't that.
Yeah.
And so kind of moved along. And he was anemic and just had some weird things. But in my opinion, it wasn't like he was super sick. Now, we spent about a week every month in the hospital with these really high fevers. But still, we just kind of learned to deal with it. And then as time went on, he continued to have different things. Like for medical people, he had no B cells, and you can't just give B cells. And so we kind of just went with the flow on things. To look at him, you would have no idea there's anything wrong with him. He was so smart and so sweet and so cute and super athletic, competitive, and he was just small. So most people had no idea that Brock missed, 1 day of school every month to have a blood transfusion and another transfusion, like every single month. No one had any idea that, or that he'd be out for a week and they probably thought he was on vacation and he was really in the hospital. And we didn't really talk about it. We didn't really feel sorry for ourselves. We didn't feel sorry for him. We didn't, we never led Tucker to believe that anything was wrong or anything bad could happen to us. We just kind of thought we were bulletproof, which is kind of funny when you go back and think about this. It's not normal to be in the hospital 1 day a month your whole life, but for us it was just normal. We just did it.
So how far along into Brock's life was it when you guys realized, oh, this isn't just a couple medical things we have to figure out, or this is maybe an issue or something we're gonna have to deal with in the prolonged
I don't know. I mean, it always seemed to me like there was an answer coming. So, I mean,
Wow.
again, we dealt with it for 14 and a half years, and I always thought, somebody was going to have the answer. I remember at one point in time I got so frustrated and told a friend of mine, I'm an Ohio State grad, and I said, look, I'd even probably take Brock to hell if they could fix him. And then a week later, we find out we're going to the University of Michigan hospitals in Ann Arbor to see a white blood cell specialist. I'm like, he looked at me and says, well, you got your wish. So sorry if you're a Michigan fan out there, but
I don't think any Michigan fans listen.
yeah,
but we're glad you're here, I guess.
Absolutely. But I was always optimistic that we were always going to find something. It seemed like we were always putting Band-Aids on big gaping wounds.
Yeah.
And, we were trying like, this is the fix, and it wouldn't be the fix, and we'd ride that for a while, and then something would change, and we'd have to do something over. But I always thought an answer was coming.
Yeah, it really started when he was probably 12, and he started having stomach bleeds, which were new to us. And we'd have to go in and have him banded. And again, we would just be like, okay, this is what we're doing. And then we knew that a bone marrow transplant was somewhere in his future, and we were all tested when he was about 3, but none of us were oddly a good match. Everything about Brock was odd, just everything. Everything was so odd. We went to the NIH, which is National Institute of Health, the smartest doctors in the world, every month for about 2 years, and even they couldn't figure
Every
it out.
month for 2 years.
For 2 years, they flew us there because he was so odd. We have had complete genome sequencing of our whole family done. We know a lot of things.
Kristi is not my sister.
Yeah, we know we're not related. We know Tucker's really ours and Brock's really, because honestly,
Are you related to any presidents or anything?
No,
We didn't get that far.
nothing that exciting. Just trying to figure out what's wrong with him. And honestly, like, if he didn't look so much like us, I would think like maybe he was switched to the hospital. How can he have all these bizarre things out of nowhere? And we have Tucker who's never even had an ear infection.
Yeah, we are 3 healthy people, and then all of a sudden we have Brock, who's not. It just
And we
seemed
grew
weird.
up together. The most thing I was worried about was being related. I'm like, what if we're like third cousins and we didn't know it, but we're not?
We caused all that problem. We're
Right.
safe.
So
It's always nice to get that confirmed.
Yes,
yeah,
we're good.
she said most people are worried about some of the other things like HIV testing and stuff like that. I'm like, nope, I'm not worried about that.
Yeah, we're good.
So
my
anyway,
gosh.
he started having stomach bleeds, and then we were brought in to talk to a new bone marrow transplant director. And I thought it was, if it ever comes to this is what's going to happen. Well, lo and behold, we sat there with Brock for about 6 hours learning that it was time to do this. And I was mad. I don't get panicked. I'm just not like that. I was mad and panicked, and I called everyone I could call. I called the NIH saying, look what they want to do. And they're like, well, we think it's time. I went up to his doctor's office, right at his main doctor, and to her, and I'm like, they want to do this, and nobody would listen to my side of the story.
And we kept saying, God, close the door.
Yeah.
If this is not what it's supposed to be, close the door.
Yeah.
We're like, insurance, please don't cover it. Like, I need something to tell me, because I had no peace with it. No peace at all. And so finally, we thought we had a little bit of peace when we found out that 100 days is a big deal. So if you can make it to 100 days, then you're pretty much going to be okay for the most part.
After the transplant.
After
bone marrow
transplant, after bone marrow transplant. And so
And this was how many years ago?
this was in 2014.
Okay.
But 100 days was Christmas.
Oh,
So
wow.
I was
The
like,
100-day mark was Christmas.
Okay, it's Jesus'
You remember
birthday.
standing in the garage when we started doing the math, and the 100 days actually landed on Christmas. We're like,
Wow.
this is it. This is God. This is the answer that we've been looking for.
Yeah.
This is, not only is the door partially open, but it's wide open, and we're coming through now.
And just a little bit of context for, you guys that have been trying to find medical solutions for, 13 years?
Yeah.
13, is that right?
Yeah.
13 years to this point.
Yeah.
It's a long time. That's a long time to be fighting and advocating for your son.
Yes.
And so here we are, this thing that you guys, like you said, knew was in his future at some point. And 13 years later, you guys do all the testing. All the doctors are giving you the same thing, and so you're coming to the conclusion it's time to do it. 100 days is Christmas. You guys also, just again, we just know each other so well. Just make sure everybody gets to know you as well as I know you. But you guys are really faithful people. You have been Christians for how long?
For, since the 20s. For
Longer
me.
than you've been alive. Yeah.
Yeah, and that
Forever.
was one of the struggles was, so I work at a church, and I've worked there for 21 years.
Yeah.
So I'm like, there was one point where we were in the hospital when Brock was younger, and we were there so much, they would just send me down for tests. Like, they can't do that now, but before everything was so secure.
Right.
They just send Brock and I down to wherever. And I remember sitting there thinking, like, this is awful. Like, what is going on, God? Like, I'm faithful. Brock's faithful. I work at a church. What more do you want from me?
Right.
And this boy was wheeled out who had just had both of his legs amputated.
Oh my gosh.
And you could still see like his bandages, and I'm like, all right, God, I got your point. It could be worse.
Oh wow.
So
Wow.
yeah, having all that
What a
faith
perspective.
and
Yeah.
wanting just an answer, and so many people praying for him because, you know, he was born in a church basically. And so everyone prayed for him for every day for his whole entire life.
Yeah. People learned the word prayer that weren't even going to church.
Oh.
You know, we had thousands and thousands and thousands. So, I mean, that's just, to me, it was one of those, you knew it was going to be a positive outcome because we've got all these people praying, and what a great testimony this is going to be for God when all of a sudden, you know, like, I have no idea what healed him, but he's healed. Yeah. And then, you know, we've got this great testimony for years to come of he wasn't going to be healed, but now he is. It had to be a God moment. So.
And what was even, you know, I think what moved the hearts of so many people, not only was your guys' faith, but Brock was just, I mean, that kid, at the time, when I first met Brock, I was not, I grew up in church, I grew up Catholic, but still hadn't had a moment where I'd personally, you know, decided to follow Jesus, you know, and give him my heart. And he was somebody who, there was so much joy inside of that little man that it was impossible not to be drawn to him, be challenged by him. I can remember stories of him being at youth group and sharing his faith there, him being at camps that he would go to and sharing his faith there, and him baptizing his friends, you know, in the, you know, 5th grade or whatever. Like, I could just remember these, I have these pictures in my mind of, man, what a light that God used for so many years. And so I think that, you know, the question that everybody was asking, and just for more context, I'm just trying to remember things that might be helpful to people listening. Brock and Tucker went to school here in Canal and Chester. We all grew up together, really. And so the whole community was rallied around him and you guys, and not just church communities, but the community. Just so many people who were like, man, I think had known you guys were Jesus followers and known that Brock was a Jesus follower and maybe prayed for the first time because of him.
I certainly believe that.
And how many people made decisions to follow Jesus because of him before even all the really tragic stuff happened.
He was unapologetically full of faith. Like, if he met you and you didn't go to church, he thought that was the weirdest thing. Like, what do you mean you don't go to church?
How could you not?
And so, like, not judging, but so unassuming of, you know, in him to just, how do you not go to church and how don't you believe in Jesus? And even, you know, after he was gone, I found his Bible and I started reading some stuff I'd never seen before, and the stuff he wrote, and, you know, he was not afraid of the bone marrow transplant. He wrote in there, I'm not afraid of this. I know God has a plan for my life. Just so strong, stronger than I was and am in my faith. And so that was another thing where he had beat every odd. Like, we were told so many times, he won't live to be 2, he won't live to be 3, he won't live to be 4. And somewhere along the line, we're like, we don't want to hear it, you know? We don't want to hear it.
We don't receive it.
He's only gonna live 10 years, then we're going to make it the best 10 years of his life, which stressed a lot of moms out there. Because
when he's out there playing football.
Do whatever he wanted to do.
Absolutely.
He played football, and he had a port in his chest, and I asked the doctor, what do you do for kids that have a port in the chest? She's like, well, they don't play football. Well, this one is, let's figure it out. And I had moms going, oh, what about band? I'm like, no, that's just not what he wants to do.
Man.
Yeah, if he wanted to do band, we'd have done band, but he didn't want to. He was sports from the get-go.
Yeah, it was in his blood.
Absolutely.
That's
just
for
such
sure.
a light. Like, if you met him, you remembered him. I never met anyone who didn't like him. He was just so positive and loved everybody. Like, he was such a picture of how Christ loves people, even when he was younger. I mean, Tucker is such an amazing kid, but if I'm being honest, there were days I wanted to strangle him, like most kids.
Like a normal kid.
And I would have to tell Terry that, like, Tucker is normal. There's something not normal about Brock. And again, we never thought in a million years we would lose him.
And the crazy thing is, Brock, it didn't matter if he was talking to a 2-year-old kid or an 80-year-old man. He could just come and meet them, and everybody walked away thinking that they were best friends. And it's such an odd thing for an 8 and a 9 and a 10-year-old kid to have the ability to converse with, you know, an adult or a geriatric adult at that, and just ask him like very pointed questions. I mean, he was wise beyond his years.
You know, my senior year of high school, I think that's when I really started. I was around Brock a lot more. You know, I always was aware, and I think him and my younger brother were closer in age and did a lot more, you know, sporting activities together. But he was the ball boy for our basketball team, and you know, I played the position on the basketball team left bench, and so I sat right next to the ball boy, and so me and Brock had a lot of good conversations there for a while, and he was with us every game. It felt like, and you know, I remember him. we put on a shooting shirt, and he's because of all the stuff going on, he's probably 4 foot something,
small, yeah.
Tiny.
and he had it all dangling off of him. He's got his arms, flexing in that. It was at the Zanesville High School gym or something. I think it was there.
Yes. And he did it. That's right.
Yeah. And I got to spend a lot of time with him, and even to your point, Terry, he was just one of the guys.
Yeah.
Here he is.
He loved you.
No.
He loved you. He loved. He had a special bond with several people in your class, and I don't know why. Like someone would come over, and I'd have to tell them at 10:30 at night, like, "Well, Brock's in 7th grade, so he has a good bed."
You guys got to leave so he can get up in the morning.
It was so strange. I mean, he was one of the guys.
Yeah. He didn't feel like you were babysitting.
Yeah, and I think that has something to do with just the magnetism of this soul who has gone through some really hard stuff.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of courage to live his life.
Yeah.
Which furthers the argument. If he's such a bright light, why does God want to extinguish that light?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. He never felt sorry for himself. You never heard him complain about anything. Like from the time he was little, if we passed Children's Hospital before he was even in school and someone was with him, he'd be like, "There's my school," or he'd wake up and be like, "Oh, yes, I don't have to go to school. I get to have a blood transfusion day." Like, who has that?
What is wrong with you, kid?
Who has that kind of attitude? And we made it fun. Like,
Yeah.
we spent so much time in the hospital, and I tried so hard to make it fun. We would decorate for Halloween. If he was in there for Halloween, we would make
Practical
tents.
jokes you did? Holy
we did
cow.
everything to make it seem like if we're going to go through this, it's going to be fun
you
somehow.
guys ran the hospital.
That's right.
Oh, yeah,
and of course, everyone loved him there as well.
Yeah.
So
Oh my gosh.
Put fake cockroaches in the sink, and at one point in time he wasn't feeling good at all, could barely get up, and the nurse comes walking back in, and like they have their computer and their mouse or whatever, and she's rolling her mouse back and forth and it's not working, and she turns it over and there's tape on it, and we didn't know this, and he's like he's been in bed for like days, and Kristi looked at Brock, "Did you put tape on her mouse?" And this little smile and giggle, the smile and giggle from that boy will just, I'm telling you, that's what it's going to sound like in heaven. Forget the harps, it's going to be that little giggle.
Wow, that's so true.
Yeah.
That's so true. I just want to tell you guys, even before we get into more stuff, thank you so much for it takes, as people listening, you can probably imagine, it just takes a lot of courage to come and share your story. You guys have done this habitually over the past couple of years, but to every time, I just feel like it's worth honoring when you guys to go, man, this really hard experience that even as I think about it, just shakes me to like my core, to think about what
now
you
that
guys,
you're a father.
Oh, every day.
Yeah.
It was my daughter's birthday yesterday, and there's not a day that goes by that I don't, think about people like you, and the story kind of moves on, and Brock went through the bone marrow transplant, and the worst happened, and just the most tragic of circumstances, and that was. On what day of the 100 days was it?
it was past 100
past
days.
100 days.
We knew once we hit 100 days it probably wasn't going to be our magical day, but
Yeah.
We were about 150 days out from that.
I mean, Brock did amazing in transplant, so it's hard, and you go through. They're basically wiping out your complete immune system, changing your DNA, and then giving you a new one from someone that we didn't even really have the best match that we wanted. Like, it wasn't even the perfect match, but we had to do what we had to do. And so he was amazing. Like, all the things that happened, he didn't do. Like, he just was great. Every day they'd be like, well, tomorrow he's probably really sick. And I mean, it wasn't, a walk in the park, but compared to everything else, he was a rock star. He went home in record time of anyone else that, had bone marrow transplant. And then everything just started going wrong because we all have these things that live in our body that we can fight off, and he couldn't, and he seemed to get every single thing. I mean, we were in the hospital all the time. How is he catching things? And so it just wasn't anything that we could do about it. But still, I thought he was gonna beat the odds. He had at one point this adenovirus, and it was in his intestines and everywhere else, and they came into me and said, kids don't really overcome this, and his doctor fought to get him in a trial, so off we go in an ambulance to Cincinnati, and it worked. He beat that. So you're like, okay, there's like one thing after another that he's just beating.
You just get so used to him overcoming these crazy odds.
Yeah, we already knew the end of the story.
Right, so when we found out he had things just went bad, and he ended up in ICU, and they came in and sat with me, and I could tell all their faces changed a little bit, and they said, this just isn't the infection we wanted him to have. And so we knew, and I had read about it, which they tell you not to, and of course I looked it up, and it was bad.
I'll never forget it. Fusarium. I will never forget that name as long as I'm alive.
Yeah. And I asked, they bring in the specialist. I'm like, so I just read that this is like 100% fatal in immune compromised kids. And he goes, well, we have some things we can try. And I even Facebook post and said, well, they've never met this kid. Like, he's going to beat it. And
meanwhile, in the intensive care, she has Bible verses on healing and overcoming on little Post-it notes. I mean, so these are, 6-8 foot tall doors, glass. She has them, probably 150 of them all over the place. I mean,
it was definitely a place of no faith. Like, everything was gloom and doom, and I wasn't used to that. That's not how we lived our life. We were upbeat, we were positive, we made the best of everything. And you go down there, and it's all so gloom and doom. And one of the doctors called me out in the hallway one day, and he's like, "You okay?" And I said, "No." I said, "Everything's so gloom and doom down here." And he's like, "We don't like to give false hope." And I said, "Well, my child's in there, sedated with all this stuff. The only thing I have is hope. If there's no hope, why is he still in there?" And so it was hard. Like, I felt like I was fighting against all these people that didn't. I called them gloom and doom because the doctors were like that. And one day I was putting a little verse up, and one of the doctors came up to me, and he's like, "Hey," and I was like, "What?" And he's like, "I've been praying for your boy." And I was like, "Oh, there is somebody here that has some kind of faith."
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
But things went things went bad from there, and we ended up losing him. And it wasn't like a nice little, not less ever nice, but not a quiet just go to sleep kind of thing. It was traumatic, and it was tragic. And one of our friends actually was a respiratory therapist who gave him his last breath, and we're in the room with him, and it was awful. Like, just the worst thing you could think of watching, and nothing you can do. And still, when they told us it was over, I 100% thought it was going to be like the movies, like beep, beep, and he would be fine. And he wasn't. And I just remember at that point for me, standing there feeling like everything I believed in, everything I put my faith in was just gone. Like, nothing was true. Nothing was real. How could this happen? We had done something at one point where we asked people from wherever they were praying to send us something, and we had everyone in the United States and some other places,
all 50 states,
that were praying. And I'm like, how God can all this be going on, and yet here I stand, and they're telling me that it's over.
Well, I remember I think we had youth group that night or something, and obviously we do youth ministry in the community. Brock went to school, so all these kids know him, and it was just the loss felt everywhere, around. It was, everybody was going through, obviously not to the extent,
right.
that
everybody shared in it, no doubt about it.
Yeah. And I don't know, it was one of those life-changing days for anybody that knew him.
Right.
And, the coming days and all of the, funeral preparations and I can remember being at the Canal Chester High School football stadium. Things
prayer vigil.
Things packed to the gills. I can remember Pastor Steve, from Sycamore, and what a great guy. And he came and gave basically an altar call, gave an opportunity for people after Brock's eulogy to follow Jesus. And I just remember looking around, going, "Man, there's how many people stood up."
It was crazy.
Yeah.
So we were very public with Brock's story. Like, if you followed me, I think it was called B-Rock's Bullpen at the time. Now it's the BrockStrong Foundation. I posted every day what was going on.
I forgot about that.
Everyone was praying for him, and I wanted them to pray for him. I wanted them to be updated, and it was impossible to update everyone. So we kind of just used this platform. And so, unfortunately, when Brock passed away,
I was like, why didn't I think of these before?
We had to call and tell people, and all of a sudden we're thinking, Tucker's at school. He's a junior in high school. He has no idea, because we didn't know that was going to happen.
We didn't see anything coming.
No, so I called my boss, and they're all at lunch, and he tells me today, he has no idea what I said. He just knew something was bad, and I said they needed to bring Tucker. So they go to get Tucker at school. They don't say anything to Tucker. Tucker sees that they're picking him up, and he just thinks something's wrong. And before Tucker even got to the hospital, somebody had tweeted "R.I.P. Brock." So we had told no one yet, no one. And so someone, put that on there, and I just remember seeing Tucker, and I told you I don't cry very much, but this usually gets me. But just seeing Tucker in the hallway, and Tucker saying, "I'm not a brother anymore," was so hard. And just to see his reaction of it, and it was so hard. And so, then you're just rushed into all these decisions. And we had never talked about any of it. Like, you don't talk about what you're going to do if something happens to your kid. And I know everyone around us probably thinks we're crazy because they saw it coming, but we just didn't. And so, you're making all these decisions. Are you going to bury me and cremate him? And Terry and I were right on the same track. And if we hadn't been, I don't know what would have happened.
Right.
And, the counselor, I forget what he's called, the counselor guy is like talking to Tucker, calling him Tyler, asking him all these strange
Number one
questions.
rule in counseling.
Like, get the name right. But it's all this going on. Meanwhile, Brock's little body is still in the room with us, and it was hard. And so we knew we wanted to make it fun. Like, we knew that all these people had followed him, and everyone's eyes were going to be on us. They were going to be watching how we reacted to this. They were going to be watching, you know, a lot of them, I'm sure, thought, oh, what kind of God do you serve? You know, you work at a church, you're a believer, he's been in ministry, like, what good did that do you? So we knew that we had to make it positive. And so we knew we wanted it to be somewhere cool. And the funeral home said, how many people do you think? And we're like, well, it's graduation weekend, it's Memorial Day weekend, maybe a couple hundred people. And they're like, oh, we think that we think you're gonna have more. So we went to Kent Riggs, the athletic director, and said, hey, we want to do it in the high school. And he was amazing. And he said,
whatever you want, however you want it.
Yeah, whatever you want to do. And like, we want a message. Like, we want my pastor to preach the gospel, which is very odd in a school. And they said, whatever you want to do. And so we get there, and you can tell them the rest.
Yeah. So I mean, we thought it'd be cute, you know, because we had the whole, you know, the entryway to the football stadium line with pictures of Brock, and we thought we would kind of do like what you normally do at a funeral and stand there and, you know, greet people as they came in. We're like, yeah, that's kind of cute, because the line went from the door all the way down to the road. I mean, they literally had to stop the traffic coming in because there wasn't any room. So then they finally got us out of here, and there were over 4,000 people at this thing. So picture
crazy.
Canal Winchester High School football stadium. You know, the entire stadium is filled, and then you have on the right side of the hill completely full, and the left side of the hill completely full, and then probably 10 deep, you know, on the fence, and then we had probably 60 seats up on the track, you know, just completely full. And it was just absolutely unbelievable. I mean, I never in my life thought, you know, that, you know, a son that we birthed would have that much of an impact. Yeah. But, you know, like Kristi says, we had, you know, Pastor Steve came and he gave a, you know, hey, you know, nothing's promised. I mean, what better picture do you have of the frailty of life than, you know, this situation right now? And he called everybody and said, hey, if you don't have a relationship with God, now is the time. And again, we had thousands of people praying for him, and, you know, this could have been, you know, the roller coaster ride for them. You know, do they fall off the cliff because they've been praying for something that didn't happen, and now do they not believe in God because of this? Or, you know, do they look at, you know, Kristi and I and Tucker that are still faith-filled? I mean, honestly, the only opportunity I have to be with my son is because of Jesus, and he's in heaven. So, I mean, obviously, our faith is incredibly important, if not more so now. But, you know, Steve made that call, and, you know, Kristi and I were kind of, you know, looking forward. You know, Tucker got up and sang, and I think I lost it a couple of times there with, you know, him being able to sing, you know, at his brother's celebration service. But when then Steve asked that question, he said, Terry, Kristi, turn around and look. And we turned around, and there were hundreds of people. And we always say that, you know, that is absolutely amazing, and God's kingdom definitely increased dramatically that day. But we would trade every bit of that, you know, for him to still be here, still be healthy, you know, be in his second year of college right now, going to be the doctor that he wanted to be and curing cancer.
Yeah.
Because what an amazing testimony for God. We've had every doctor, including the smartest doctors in the world, say, we don't know what's wrong with him. We don't know how to fix him. And then for him to be well. Like, when he was little, he had a feeding tube, and I hated it. And it's taped to his face. And I would take him all the time to try to get it out. And they would tell me, like, no, or whatever. And so they humored me one day and did this test, like, 3 weeks early. And he was able to get it out. And he looked at me and said, there is no possible way that this is happening. And I said, I think there is, because of God. And he didn't believe in God. And he's like, well, I said, you just told me there's no other way. Yeah. You know, how can you think that? So
we think there's a way.
Just what a testimony that would have been to God. And in my opinion, how much stronger it would have made everyone's faith that started believing in God because of Brock and watching this whole story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Few questions come to mind, and we might actually do a two-parter if you guys are okay with it.
I know you're in trouble, because
I'm not in trouble.
I love deep conversations.
No,
we love. I mean, it is our favorite subject to talk about too, as our son.
There's so much, and we were talking before this, and I think if there was ever a time where your guys' experience with Brock and with Brock's passing, if there's ever a time in the history of the world where every single person needs to hear how you guys have processed this. It's not perfect. I'm sure you guys would say, like, the way, you know, nobody grieves perfectly.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we were talking about the Holmes stress scale, and like the most stressful things you can experience. And I think you probably know about it a little bit more than I do. But well, I heard on a podcast the other day where the most stressful thing you can experience is losing a spouse or losing a child. And I think you added somebody who you take care of.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah. I read that in one of my books that kind of walk you through grief, and it says, you know, if you lose your parent, it's awful. It's
Yeah.
like, you know, I lost my mom at an early
Yeah.
age, and it was hard, but I wasn't with her every day. She was, you know, it's kind of more the natural progression.
Yeah.
You expect your
Yeah,
parents to go
at some
before
point.
you.
Yeah, 'cause
Yeah, I
they're
mean, maybe
older
not when she's 63, but you expect that.
Right.
But to have a child, and then on top of that, a child who you are a caretaker for, that you know, you have spent all this time. I mean, that was my purpose in life. Like, I knew everything about everything blood related. I probably could have been a nurse in that particular
Yeah.
field.
I think you have your PhD in blood, no doubt.
Yeah, I knew what was going on. I was his best advocate, and so someone that you're doing all that with and that lives with you is the worst thing. The only thing that would have been worse is if he would have taken his own life, according to this book, because not only do you have all that, but then you have all the questions of the whys and why didn't I see it coming.
Plus, there's no name for us. I mean, if you lose your spouse, you're a widow. If you lose your parents, you're an orphan. If you lose your children, there's no, you know, we don't fit in any box.
Yeah, I think how you guys have gone through this journey, and like you said, like you guys have lots of really hard questions for God, you know, and I think so often what I loathe about faith, people who I've seen, and this is probably too harsh to say it this way, but I have a lot of really hard questions, and somewhere along the way, I had a moment with Jesus where I'm like, man, here's some of my hard questions, you know, and I'm going to ask you, like, I don't understand why this happens. And what I've discovered is that maybe God won't answer your questions directly, but he always answers you in some way. And he always leads you towards something else. Or like your moment where, you know, you're in the hospital and that boy got walked out of the hospital room. It was an answer, and maybe it wasn't the answer, and we're never going to get the answer, you know, until we, you know, reach eternity. But to go, man, there's lots of hard questions, and this is a year of hard questions for so many people.
For sure.
A year of, I mean, lots of people who have lost multiple people to COVID. We know there's lots of people that, you know, over 500,000 people in our country that's been their experience. And then there's the grief of losing just what we thought life would be over the past year. I mean, proms and grandparents not being able to see the birth of their grandbabies, and you know, we canceled our family Christmas parties, and we canceled our Thanksgivings, and there's grief that comes along with that. There's birthday parties that we had to miss, and memories and moments that, man, that everybody is having to, in their own way, grieve.
Right.
And grief for a lot of people is relative. Like, you know, I'm sure that you guys would agree with this. We hope nobody ever has to go through, you know, the extent of grief that you guys have had to go through. But we all grieve, and we all grieve differently. And I think this is a space and time where your guys' story, you know, I want to learn from you, because there's a lot of grief that I'm processing personally, and I know a lot of people in our church are processing, and this transition in society of, man, we can't run from our grief anymore.
Right.
We can't distract ourselves from our grief anymore. That we used to get our life so packed full of stuff from the time we woke up to even after we should be in bed, you know, every single day. But all of a sudden, you know, this was a while ago, and most things are back now, but all of a sudden we can't go out to eat. All of a sudden we can't travel for work. All of a sudden we can't
come to church,
watch baseball. You know, when that was for me, they're like, oh, baseball's gone. You know, or just canceling the season. You know, but it's a real thing. You know, and so I'd love to. One, I just thank you guys for sharing again. I want to talk about, for you guys, and maybe here's the question that I'm getting at. What have you learned about grief, generally?
Well, I guess I'll start, because you kind of alluded to this, it seems like that we have the ultimate trump card. You know, I've got this in my life, but you guys have had this. You know, it's nowhere near that. And we always say to people, it doesn't matter whether your thing, you know, in your world, it's everything. So whether you've lost a child, whether you've lost a cat, we've, lost a horse. We've had somebody say, I know what you're going through. I mean, there's something. And if it's something to you, then it's something. They're not comparable, so don't try. And they're not, you can't put them on a scale like this one's on a 10, this one's only a 3. If you're grieving something, you're grieving something. And we always told each other, and, honestly, I don't know what I'd do, in this life without her. I mean, we're kind of like you guys. I mean, we started dating almost when we were babies. Yeah. And, our relationship has been incredible. And if anything, it's had to strengthen, since we've lost Brock. But, there were days where we just didn't want to get out of bed. But our line to each other was always, because when your kids get older, now these things that you've been telling them, this is what you need to do. Yeah. Well, you start hearing, your kids, when they get old enough, they start saying these things back to you. So, even we think about, with Brock, when these are the cards we've been dealt, we just have to deal with it. I know you can't go to D.C. I know you broke your arm and you can't play baseball anymore, but unfortunately, bud, these are the cards we've been dealt. We have to deal with them. So we've, picture from heaven, Brock talking to us going, hey, Mom and Dad, these are the cards you've been dealt. What are you going to do with it? So, we always instilled in him to make the best of a horrible situation, a bad situation, something completely unfair to a little 14-and-a-half-year-old kid. But now we've got to live it ourselves. And we had days where we didn't want to get out of bed. I mean, it's ugly. I mean, it is. I don't understand it. I'm mad at God. I was, you struggle with your faith, because faith is easy. When you think your life's going rough, it's not really going rough. It could be so much worse. But faith is easy when it's going, pretty smooth. But all of a sudden, when your world gets rocked, and you know that God is able, but he chose not to. For some reason, some greater reason, God chose not to save our son. And I can't for the life of me figure it out, but I've got a little small brain here on earth that I can't wait till I get my big brain when I get to heaven. Exactly and could kind of, hear this whole story out as to why it had to happen.
Yeah. For me, I'm a generally upbeat, happy, positive person. It's just who I am, So this was a new me after Brock passed away. And the first thing was my faith. And when I say my faith, I'd never really thought, oh, there is no God. I never thought any of that. But for me, prayer was huge. I'm like, what is the point of prayer? God, I just wrote every scripture about prayer on a Post-it note, so I know them. And you say over and over again, you're going to answer us. And I didn't want to hear that, oh, he did answer you, but in a different way. Right. Nope. You tell us to ask specifically, and you will answer.
We were specific.
And I was specific about all of it. And that was the hardest thing for me. Like, I just felt like this thing I believed in and I turned to in prayer so much didn't really mean anything. I was so skeptical. And, working at a church, I would go to my boss, who's the pastor, all the time and say, like, I'm just struggling with this. And he didn't have any answers for me because he was struggling with it too. He loved Brock too. And so I just would say to someone, I'm the kind, if I say I'm going to pray for you, I'm going to pray for you, even if it's just a little quick prayer. But I would feel like I would talk to these people that were going through things like this and say, God is able, but in the back of my mind, I always thought, but he might not. Or if someone wrote like, oh, an answer to prayer, my child was healed, the cynical side of me was like, was your child healed because of your prayer to God, or was it the right medicine? And I hated that about me. I hated that this thing that was such a part of who Kristi Johnson was now kind of out the window, and I didn't know how to get it back. I'm such a mind over matter person. Like, I'm just going to think myself into this feeling and not feel myself into the, the thought. And that was kind of gone. And I was sad all the time. Like, I had never been that way. I was just sad and I cried all the time. And I have this other child who's starting a senior year, should be living his best life. And I have to show up for him every day. He's used to fun Kristi, who does, all the things that I love being a mom. I love all the things about being a mom. I love birthdays and classroom things. I just loved all of it and made a big deal out of everything. And so now I found myself being this person where I could not mind over matter what I was feeling. And on top of that, Terry had to learn how to deal with a wife who cried all the time because he wasn't used to that. Like, I don't think I wore makeup in like 6 months. And
you found out about waterproof makeup.
Yeah, I didn't know there was waterproof mascara.
I mean, 40-some years and you didn't know about it. That's pretty good, I guess.
Would say I'm thankful to have lived that long without needing it. But
did you buy it?
I still don't know what it is.
Yeah, I saw you in the makeup section.
So it was just it was hard. I felt like a different person. And like Terry said, I knew I couldn't stay in bed, and mainly for Tucker. I also knew it wasn't honoring to Brock to stay in bed and just, and waste myself away. So I always tell people, like, it's okay to fall apart and stay in bed for a day, but you got to get up and you got to put one foot in front of the other. And that's all you can do some days. There's days I drove to work. I don't even remember driving how I got there. Like, it was just this person who I'm very in control and very, everything's, you know, a little bit of a perfectionism person. And I was none of that. I was just a hot mess. And I could still kind of smile for the masses. So if you saw me somewhere, you probably would think like, oh, she has it all together. And I didn't want people to think that. So I was very, very honest on social media. I'm way better in writing than I am in person. And so I love to just journal out what I'm feeling. And I did that a lot on Facebook because I didn't want people to think like I was fine. And if this happened to them, I didn't want them to think that, oh, there's something wrong with me if I'm sad, because I had seen that. I had watched other people lose children or go through something hard, and the ones that were like, oh, you know, he's with Jesus and blah blah blah, I just didn't believe that was real. And it might have been, but for me, I had a hard time thinking that anyone could just be that okay with it, because we are human and we're sad for what we're missing. I 100% know that Brock is in heaven and he's living his best life, and he's missed out on so much sorrow and heartache here, and I'm thankful for that. But the selfish side of me wants him here. Like, that's one of my questions for God. Why don't you make us so that you're like, oh my gosh, your mom died, that's amazing, you know? Why are we so selfish and want him here? So I didn't want people to think that. So I tried to be really honest, but I always try to come back to choosing joy. That was my big thing, was like, just wake up, choose joy. It's a choice. You have to talk yourself into being okay. You can't just feel it, because you're not going to feel it. And so that was hard. And the prayer thing took me a couple years to get back to where I was. Just so hard. I felt like a hypocrite when I would pray for someone, because, you know, and God wants you to pray about everything. And I would be like, why does God care about this when I had this big, huge, good prayer that he didn't answer the way I wanted him to? So that was really tough. And I just it took me about 2 years to get back to where I'm like, all right, God, because, you know, if you just want us to have a relationship with you and you just want to converse with us and you want to know us, that's one thing. But you say over and over again, ask and you'll receive, and, you know, all the things. And I just still don't understand that. But I think that's where faith comes in. You have to just trust that he knows what he's doing.
Yeah. Well, and I think part of that faith part is, you know, God provided Kristi and I each other, you know, so while we're grieving this, while, you know, she's laying in bed crying, I'm there and able to help pull her out of bed and get moving. And then when I'm crying in bed and down on my knees and can't understand why, then she's there to pull me back up. So I think really God kept us opposites. You know, he never had us both, you know, happy at the same time, nor did he have us sad at the same time. So, I mean, you talk about the helpmate and what, you know, God intended for a relationship. We were there to pick each other up. So, I mean, it makes me, you know, incredibly sad to think of people that would not have, you know, going through this catastrophic thing that we did, to not have somebody to process with and to be able to pick them up. I can't imagine that.
Yeah, I have a couple things to add. I think thank you guys for being honest about the wrestling match that faith is with Jesus. It's like, it's a wrestling match, you know, and I would say, I think as you, Kristi, said, it's not all, you know, butterflies or faith is easy when everything's easy. You know, and when everything's really good. And when I got the big check in the mail, it's like, it's easy to, God
provided.
Yeah, because he did, you know. But it's really hard when things are hard. And I don't know, I've been processing a lot of what you guys are saying personally, like coming into this conversation. And the whole idea of choosing joy. There's one thing I've prayed a lot. God, I want to be happier. You know, like I want to experience like that fullness of joy. But it's not just happiness; it's joy, and then there's a difference. There's a difference between I'm happy right now, which is fleeting, and then there's joy, which is this steady undercurrent. It's more of a foundation than it is a feeling. Does that make sense?
More of a choice.
Yes.
You have to choose it.
And that's really hard. And when you've gone through something you guys have gone through, to sit here and say, I chose joy, it's, I don't know. I can see into how that is, you know, it comes across so easy in a sentence, but I can see in your eyes the heaviness of that.
Oh, absolutely.
That's heavy. And I literally read this morning in my devotionals, Philippians 4:4. It says, rejoice in the Lord always. I'll say it again, rejoice. You know, it even goes on to say, do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation. Here's another verse about prayer. I'm sure you could repeat it back to me.
I'm sure it was on a Post-it note.
Right.
Pray about everything.
Right. You should write this one down. By prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And what it doesn't say is in this text is that he'll answer you right away, but it says in the peace of God which transcends all understanding.
Yeah.
So what you're saying
That's
about
huge there.
My small human brain can't comprehend the big brain,
Right.
that I'll get in heaven. To go, man, like I've just been wrestling through that all day to go, the peace of God which transcends all understanding. So go like, how can I have joy and how can I have peace and not understand?
Yeah.
That's something that I've written in my journal since Brock passed away, and something I say to a lot of people is I'm praying for peace that surpasses understanding for you, because that's what's going to take to get through this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just funny you read that, because I write that in every card that I send someone who's lost a child. Like, this is what I'm praying for you, because you're not going to understand it.
No. And we think that life is this nice little, 100-piece puzzle that all of a sudden when we get that 100th piece and we put it in, we kind of stand back and look at it and go, oh, that's it. It's not that at all. I mean, we're dealing with 100 pieces here on earth when it's 1,000,000 pieces over in heaven, and we just have this little small snippet that we have to try to make sense of, and it doesn't. And the only sense that we have is we have a God that's greater than us, and God doesn't make mistakes. And that was, Kristi's rough thing to handle was prayer. Mine was, I think God made a mistake here. She always said, I always tell her, God doesn't make mistakes. She's like, well, maybe one, he may have, but all of God's statements are true, that he doesn't make mistakes, just so if I believe in heaven, and I know that, someday the three Johnsons that are left here on earth are going to be in heaven and reunited with Brock, that truth is just the same as he doesn't make mistakes. Yeah. And those, for me, I wrestled hard with those and still wrestle,
And all of those things sound great, and our head knows all those things, but when you want to get down to the dirty, practical, okay, how do I choose joy? I mean, I even have choose joy that Brock got with me when he was still alive. I got that tattoo. For me, it was finding what good came out of this. God doesn't waste anything. We know that, and it's not easy, and I probably couldn't have done this in the first year, but now I can see all the good. First of all, I'm just thankful for being his mom for that long, and just a little ways, probably about 6 months down the road, I realized, gosh, I just miss him, what he did for me. I know he was 14 and a half, but he was so encouraging. I need Tucker, because Tucker will say, you probably shouldn't wear that, Mom. Brock was just you're beautiful, In
everything.
And so he was just that, so I missed that about him, and I had to focus on what was good, all the people's lives he's changed. Everything good about him, I just kept focusing on that. I mean, our foundation, we're almost at $1 million back in the community. We wouldn't have done that if he was here. And again, everything I'm saying to you, I would wash away if I could have him back. Yeah. But I haven't figured out a way to do that yet. Yeah. And so just focusing on what you do have, and I'm still here for a reason. I got to get up. I got to keep moving. That helps me to choose joy, finding the joy. And like you said, joy is deep down knowing. I know that I'm going to, like Terry said, I know I'm going to see Brock again. I know I have the security of salvation. Just finding all that. And sometimes it's just as lame as writing it down and reminding yourself of, look at all these good things, and that's going to help me choose joy. And not choosing joy doesn't help anyone.
I love what you said about doing the lame things. Yeah. Because there's so many mottos and mantras and things that, when you're in a dark spot, you know them, but it's almost like things are so heavy that you can't bring yourself to do something so simple. Mm-hmm. When my encouragement would be, do it. Like you said, list out the things you're grateful for. Yeah. Put Post-it notes on your mirror that encourage you, and say them out loud with your voice. Almost not being too, in a weird way, prideful, to go, I am hurting right now, and I need to declare things over my life. Mm-hmm. I need to, you're not just going to come out of things by accident, right? You don't accidentally work your way through grief. Yeah.
I mean, it's when you're getting up to work out in the morning. I mean, nobody, when they're first starting, likes to get up at 5 in the morning to work out, but you do it. Yep. You just get up until you become those freaks in life, where you actually don't mind, or if you don't work out in the morning, you miss it, yep. So you don't feel it initially, but sometimes you just got to act yourself into that feeling.
Kind of what you said, sorry,
No,
reminded me of something I struggled with, is because I am an upbeat, happy person, and people look at me to always be in a good mood, or always, have the right thing to say or the right thing to do. And through this, people see me as so strong. That's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
It's a lot of pressure. I know I probably put on myself, but I feel it from other people. Is I don't want to let anyone down. And so I feel like I didn't have the right to be in a bad mood. I didn't have the right I had the right, but oh my gosh, I can't, people tell me all the time, like, you're so strong, I don't know how you did this, I couldn't do that, blah, 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 blah. And that's pressure. I appreciate it, and it's very nice, but then it makes me feel like, oh, they're watching me, I have to be upbeat, or it's gonna disappoint them, it's gonna ruin their lives, and it's not gonna ruin their lives.
That's funny. One of the things I think would be interesting, a question to ask you guys, I should say, is you guys had to grieve publicly.
Yeah.
Is that not everybody, when something like this happens, has, the constant outpouring. And like you said, with B-Rock's bullpen, we were getting updates every week, every day, every,
multiple times a day sometimes.
And I felt being in the public eye, and it was wonderful because we had the most amazing support, but it was hard. Like when I was walking,
tell me about that. Yeah,
I'm a big exerciser, and so I decided I was going to walk outside one day, and I had 2 different cars stop and want to take me home because I thought I was just sad. And I'm like, no, I'm walking on purpose. Thank you.
I'm acting myself into a feeling right now.
Yeah, but so the support we had was just. I mean, I can't say
fun.
enough about how amazing our friends, our family, strangers, but you felt that eye on you all the time. And like I said earlier, I felt like everyone was just watching me to see how I was going to react. Oh, let's see how this God thing works out for her now. Like, I just felt that. I felt like I am representing Jesus right now. And even though I'm kind of mad at him, I got to be, sometimes in like work situations, you may disagree behind the scenes, but you go out and you're united. And I felt like that. Like, I have to go out and be Jesus' biggest cheerleader, when right now I feel like putting him on the bench, it was hard to do that. And it was hard for Tucker to be in the public eye, again. There's Tucker, who's, a senior in high school and lost his brother, who was a big force. I mean, Tucker would be in high school and people would be like, you're Brock's brother. And he's like, no, I'm older.
Yeah.
He's my brother.
Yeah, he's my brother.
Exactly.
So to try to help him through this, which, I don't even know if we did a great job with that. I should have put Tucker in counseling, and we didn't, because we were the kind of people that this is what we are dealt, and we're just going to figure out how to move forward. And it's really not fair to ask anyone to do that. So it was hard being in the public and having everyone watch you, and I felt like I just couldn't fall. I couldn't be sad. I couldn't show anyone, the downside, although I could write it. I was good at writing it on Facebook, but I thought when they saw me, people were sad about Brock, so I found myself consoling people. I'd see someone in a restaurant that would like be so sad and crying, and I felt like I had to hug them and say, it's okay, we're okay.
Yeah, we're going to be fine. We'll get there someday. Yeah.
What were your observations from it?
I really don't know. It's such an odd concept. I mean, again, you have the people that always compare, like I've got no story better, or, you have the ultimate trump card. But people just want to grieve. And what Kristi said, we found that a lot, because one of the odd things about when you lose a child is, like, I don't want to bring up Brock in front of Kristi, because that's going to make her sad. Well, it's actually the opposite. It's like, the more we can, I mean, you could probably see we have smiles on our face, talking about the most horrific thing that we've ever gone through in our entire lives. But this is our son that God gave us. I mean, it's one of the most, it's top 3 treasured assets for me in my entire life. Wow. So it's great to be able to sit and talk about Brock. So, like when, you have somebody that's lost somebody, don't be afraid, to bring them up and just say, hey, I was thinking about Brock today, and, you may not know this. I mean, people come up to us all the time, like, I don't know if you've ever seen these pictures, but if you think about it, that's the most greatest treasure you can get is like a picture that you didn't know of. Because, as far as us, we've got a finite number of pictures of our family together. I mean, there are only so many pictures of Brock in this world, some of which we have, some of which we've never seen.
Wow. Stories.
We get to hear all kinds of stories of like, well, we're getting ready to do high school scholarships soon. And we have a sit down with, these people, like they better believe, like if they knew Brock, one of my questions is going to be, what's your favorite story about Brock? Because those just make me smile and just make you light up, and just, you get to see how big of a beacon he was, for other people that we just didn't have the opportunity to see.
And I have found, like he was saying, some people would come up, and especially to me, say things. I think women are just more open and honest about how I know exactly how you feel because fill in the blank. And some of them would be like crazy things. And I won't even say what they were. Some of them were like crazy things that weren't comparable. And Terry would get so mad about it because he thought, how dare they say something to you? But for me, I thought, they're just trying to relate to me. And that's the most, stressful, agonizing thing they can think of. So I don't think they're doing it to really think it equals. They're just trying to find a way to relate to me. And like, ironically, right before Brock went into transplant, I read Robin Roberts' book on her bone marrow transplant. And that's where we kind of got the whole thing where she said her mom would always tell her, everybody's got something. And just because this is your something, it's no bigger than that something. And so I try to tell people that all the time because someone will try to talk to me about something. It's nothing compared to what you're going through. And I'll be like, no, it is, because it's the biggest thing in your life.
Wow.
She's a saint when it comes to that. I just want to come unglued sometimes. I know exactly what you're going through. I lost my cat. I'm like, you what?
Pop. Yeah.
Yes.
How I tell people all the time when they, are about to have kids and they're asking me about my kids, and I'm like, there's something about having kids that changes your DNA.
No
Just
doubt.
I'm a different person. I feel like my skin looks different. My hair's
Those
growing.
are bags because you're tired.
Yeah, my skin is, or my hair is definitely different than pre-Tucker.
My hair's going away. I just got some, but everything changes about you.
Yeah.
And I would assume the same is true when you go through what you guys have been through.
Yeah.
And so what, maybe to the extent you guys are aware, what about you guys has changed? What about your DNA has changed personally?
With
you,
having
Terry,
kids,
Kristi?
or
No, with losing.
With
'Cause
losing?
with having kids, I feel like as a mom anyway, you lose any form of selfishness that you have.
Yeah.
Like I all of a sudden was not selfish and did everything for them and didn't feel sorry for myself. And like Brock and I went through some stuff. Like I took care of a lot of stuff with him. Like just, he was 14 and a half, and some of the stuff he went through was embarrassing. And, and I just did it. You don't think about it, you just do it. So then after losing him, it kind of was like, what do I do now? I'm such a caretaker, and I loved, like I said, all the things with the mom, and Tucker didn't really want me to come to high school and be in a room mom, and that had just passed by. And obviously, we weren't going to have any more kids, and so it changed. Like I didn't know who I was anymore. All the things that I loved doing and that I thought this is my purpose, and I thought I was good at it. Like I don't think I'm good at a lot of things. I can hold my own with some things, but I felt like I was a good mom and I was good at advocating for Brock, and that was just gone, and I felt lost. It made me way more compassionate, and it made me have a bigger, wider perspective than I had ever had when things go wrong. I feel like I kind of have this Trump thing, like this is such a bad thing, and everything else, it just pales in comparison to it. So it kind of gave me that new perspective. It gave me definitely more compassion.
Yeah.
And just kind of made me feel lost. Still a little lost about our foundation that we haven't even touched on yet. I'm sorry.
No.
The whole foundation.
I want to do a part 2, by the way. I think that let's finish up I'm serious. Let's finish up the grief conversation. And I have a couple more questions I want to ask you once we get past this one. I want to get to you, Terry, too. And then we'll, for everybody listening, we'll do a part 2 right now, right after this, and we'll release it the following week just to get into the foundation and some stuff plus. So.
Yeah, because that actually that's what saved me in all this.
Yeah.
That's a good tease.
I know.
Yeah, it's coming.
So, no, just kidding. So what about you, Terry?
Stay tuned.
How have you changed? Because I obviously, like, from my perspective, like, you spent a lot of time with Brock, and you spent a lot of time with Brock, and that was your guy, man. You went and that was your buddy, know, and obviously we all love Tucker and just
no
the
doubt.
best in the world. But at the sports games, and your life changes obviously. So how have you changed? How's it changed your DNA?
Well, I have some oddities about me. Tucker
No,
and
you
I.
don't.
Yeah, I know. that's episode 3. Tucker and I, we've had a musical connection, our entire life.
Yeah,
So I've played drums, pretty much, my entire life, and then him and I got to play together. So that was our connection. And with Brock, I'm a Harry Potter nerd because him and I. One of my favorite memories is him and I, we came into the Harry Potter world well after the rest of the world. So all of the movies were out. So we would read the book at the same time. We would compete, shocker.
Brock usually won.
Yeah, he beat me every daggone time. So we would compete. We would read the book, and then we'd watch the movie together. So I remember I am a grown man on a business trip in Dallas, and I am in some used bookstore buying a Harry Potter book for myself so I can get the jump on Harry Potter and try to beat Brock. So I have that weird connection with Harry Potter, and then obviously, Brock was our Iron Man. So those three things, and, probably the most important to me was baseball.
Yeah.
That was Brock and I's thing. I got to see that kid pretty much play every game he ever played in his entire life, and that was probably the biggest loss for me. And that's, when that was gone, Brock was still on a team, and, those boys were 14 at the time, and, their travel season was still going on. It was just weird. Baseball you would think coming back to the baseball field, I came back a year later, you think that would be incredibly sad, but it was actually quite the opposite. That's where I felt close to Brock. Just to see what we call Brock-like qualities in others. We get to see, kids, because he was, again, I know we talked about, we may be incredibly biased because he's our kid, but he just played the game the way that you would want every kid to play. He just played the game the right way. He was the fiercest competitor you've ever been around in your entire life. And I remember his last 7th grade season, he was 4'0", standing on base with a kid from New Albany that was well over 6 foot tall. And he would fight you tooth and nail long as the game was going on. He would fight you tooth and nail. And as soon as the game was over, he'd be up giving you high fives and hugs. He could turn it on and turn it off. And I think that's, that competitive gene that he had is just, made Kristi and I incredibly competitive in a positive way.
Wow.
So I just missed that.
I think a big change for you, if I may say so, is
you may not.
is me, because we've always
I wasn't going to go there. I know what you're going to say now.
We've always been like we were best friends before we dated, so we've always had an amazing marriage. But I was busy with those kids, and Terry kind of could do all his things. Most of my things were kids. I didn't really do a lot on the side, but he coached baseball and he plays drums, and so he was kind of going around along in life with a wife that kind of took care of everything and everyone. Well, then all that was gone. So then I'm like, oh, I need way more attention from you.
Here I am.
And Brock was amazing at that with her. And I'm like, I'm Ricky
amazing.
Bobby. I'm like, I don't know what to do with my hands right now.
Let's go on a walk.
And I recognize with him, I haven't needed anything big. I've been pretty easy, low maintenance wife for all these years. Consider yourself like it. But then it came to where I was just.
You mean like it's changed now? You're still a maintenance wife.
Yeah, thank you. But for him, it was like a new thing.
I'm writing notes over here.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I have to take care of her, and she's sad all the time. Who is this?
Yeah.
So I think that was a big change for you, having to. Just not that, we are always been together, but I didn't have all those things to do. So I was like, okay, give me attention, give me time.
We were in and out of for 14 and a half years, we were in and out of the hospital. I bet 500 plus times. And like she talked about, National Institute of Health, they're gone for 3 and 4 days. So it's like we had at home mode, and then I can still picture this, I can still hear Brock. His bedroom was right beside ours, and he'd be like, Mom, and she would take the thermometer and go in and take his temperature. And I knew, if that temperature, was a certain level, it was hospital mode. So we had at-home mode and hospital mode. So she would go off with Brock, and off to the hospital they went, and then me and Tucker had our own little life here, and, we would take care of things here.
And now you work from home.
Yes.
Right? And so there's a lot of time you guys spend together.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. But it's...
When we were all three at home, when you guys were at home too, working at X Church, and I was at home, and all three of us were at home. And so Tucker...
That's episode 4 right there.
Yeah. It was challenging. Tucker's very much like me. Tucker is a lot like me, such a mama's boy, and just loves to sing, and he loves to talk. We're external processors.
Yeah, you guys are
Terry
awesome.
is not so much an external process. So Tucker would just walk in singing, and Terry'd be on a work call, and he'd be so angry, or we were like, oh, you're no fun to work with.
I'm sitting in the front room working on a call.
Yeah.
He comes into the kitchen just singing away. I'm sure he's making up second wind in his head at the time or whatever.
Right.
And then I get off the call and I'm like, Tucker, are you kidding? He goes, this is a public space. I mean, in the kitchen. I'm like, boy, ain't nothing a public space for you. You're not paying for it.
I love it.
But he's just such a joy and so positive, and he's just a better Tucker, better person than we were growing up, and that's really helped a lot, and it's really seeing his faith and everything just has really helped with the whole grieving process as well.
So my belief is we got him through 20 years, got him through college. Now he's working at the X. So if something happens, we're blaming you guys.
Well, he's helping me in so many different ways. And just the way you guys have processed all of this has been a gift, I think. And just to allude to your guys' church, every day is a gift. Well, to me, today's a gift to be able to, hear you guys talk about this stuff. And maybe we can end on a note, just of a little encouragement. Kristi, you mentioned it earlier, that experience when you were in that emergency room, ICU, something like that. ICU. That was all just doomsday, and there's no hope here. And I think hope's an interesting concept. In a time right now where so many people need hope, I think we're trying to get our hope from so many different things. Politics, and who your guy is or who your girl is, that you want to be president. Well, guess what? Ain't no president can give you hope.
Right.
You know what I mean? If politicians change people's hearts and change the world, and that's probably what I would have wanted to be.
Right.
But that's not where your hope comes from. People are looking to different government package. People are looking to different organizations to be a part of, and hope is just such a powerful thing. What role has hope played in your grieving process? And what I think if somebody's going through a really hard time, I think their question is there hope? And so, is there hope, and what role did it play in your grieving process?
I would say initially you feel like there is no hope. I mean, the stages that we kind of went through is, you could barely get out of bed. And then anytime you talked about Brock, like the next stage for me was, anytime you talked about Brock, you cried. And then you kind of felt bad, like if you had a moment where we had a joke and we laughed and smiled, you feel kind of bad about that, and then, you start thinking about Brock, and then like all of a sudden you just start smiling about remembering these things. And then you kind of, start, up this long hill journey where, now every time obviously you still have your sad days, but I mean, I have more good days than bad, because I think of what a difference our 14-and-a-half-year-old son made in this world, what a difference he's made in God's kingdom. And he's sitting right by Jesus right now. He's probably laughing at every bad thing and wrong thing I've said right now. And I think that, hope is everything, because hopefully someday I'm going to be sitting right beside God and sitting right beside Brock and having all of those hard conversations.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Hope is vital.
It's like a roller coaster, because I had so much hope for Brock to be healed, and that didn't happen.
Yeah.
So you're like, okay, what next? And then you have hope that like you're just going to make it through this grief, because it's literally a pain, like a physical pain that you have to lose something like that. Like I can't even explain it. It's just something that you feel like, I don't know if I'm going to live through this, honestly.
Yeah.
Like, and there were days I thought, this is terrible, but I thought, like, if I drove off the road and didn't make it, I would be all right.
Yeah.
So you go
like
through
it would be a relief.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I think even about the pandemic, I was telling you in my journal, I was reading last year how we were scared to death. You thought you were going to lose family members, and at the time Tucker's 6.5 hours away at school, and it was scary. And we all had this hope that like, okay, we're going to get through this. And I even today last year I wrote something about a hope for a vaccine, which funny, a year later, here we are. But people don't put their hope in Jesus like they should. People do put their hopes in politics, and people stand on all these different things that are so important to them and cause division. There's so much like just social injustice out there, and everyone has an opinion about everything. And I just think if you guys would keep your eyes on Jesus and see that this world is just this little blip. The president we have right now, or last time, or whoever you don't like, is just here for a blip, and Jesus is forever. And it's just such a small amount. And I keep my eyes focused on that when I don't even watch the news, because everything's so terrible and everyone's so offended, and I'm scared I'm going to say something wrong or do something wrong or offend someone. And it's because people have their focus on something else, whether it be the government or whatever. Like, fix your eyes on Jesus. It sounds very cliche, but fix your eyes on Jesus, because we're going to get there one day. And
Yeah.
I hope that, everyone watching this, I see you there. I hope that you believe in Jesus. And I know some of you don't. And I would highly suggest for you to at least investigate it. What do you have to lose? You hear that all the
Yes.
time. Like, if I'm wrong, then no big deal.
Yeah.
But if I'm right, it's a big deal for
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
And just keep your eyes on Jesus. And I promise it'll just make you more hopeful. It'll help you overcome more things. And it'll just make you such a better person. And we
Yeah.
won't have all the bad things in the news.
Beautiful.
What
That's
she
just
said.
Beautiful. Exactly. What she said. Yeah. I have nothing more to add other than thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And I hope that this has helped you if you're listening. And we have to be continued with the Johnsons here to talk about much more in the fruit of a lot of this grief that God has been doing in the world, in the community, in children's hospitals all across. There's so much more that I'd love to share with our audience about. So thank you so much. If you're in a dark space, if you're grieving something, if you don't know if there's any sort of hope for you, I hope that what this conversation has maybe illustrated for you is that yes, there is hope, and that even the hardest things you could ever go through, that Jesus and God is not just some faraway thing that only cares about the really good things, but he'll be right there with you in the really in the valley moments, in the dark times. And sometimes God won't give us answers, but he'll be there. His word says he's near to the brokenhearted, a broken and contrite spirit I won't despise. That's the God we serve, that's wrestling with us through all the hard things and has hope for you in the future. So hold on to it. You'll be okay. And catch us for part 2 of this conversation. We'd always love if you'd send us an email at podcast@thex.church. It's been such a good conversation. I can't even remember how you get a hold of us. But share, like, subscribe to this conversation, and we'll see you next week.